Now we actually have, we're live. Okay, woohoo, everybody, yes. Make noises. All right. Okay. All right. So, on account of the fact that, we're still getting this thing going, couldn't get anybody to be featured for this month. So I'm featured. It's to me. I'm going to be reading from my short story collection, The Monster Hunters. All right. And this story, the genesis of this story is me experimenting with self-publishing short stories. And in the process, finding out that there's this thing that you can do where you can buy pre-made book covers. Like you can buy them like by the 6-pack if you want to. Somebody will have like, okay, here's a set of 6 covers for a series of 6 romance novels that are set on a farm with a cowboy. And you can just buy that in advance of the thing or ever writing it actually, and then they put whatever title that they want on top of this. Just with stomach parasites that I then had the artist put that onto the cover of the thing and then send it out into the world. Commercially, it was not a success, but in my heart, I thought that I'm at peace with what I did and what I've done, and then I put it in the collection. So, all right. So the story is called Hot Chicks Infected with Stomach Parasites. Part 1. It was a cold night in Cedars Hollow. Stars shined brightly through the tall pine trees. If she had a choice, Mary would be at home, wrapped up in a blanket and enjoying a giant mug of hot chocolate. She would not be in the back seat of a Jeep with her sisters, nervously tracing her fingers up and down the scabbard of a magical katana and getting ready to go kill a bunch of vampires. She didn't have a choice, of course. When you're one of the chosen and you get a phone call from the High Council telling you to go wipe out a vamp nest in the middle of the night, then you can consider your plans for the evening canceled. Mary had thought about throwing her phone in the river more than once since the day she turned 17 and learned what fate had in store for her. Mary's older sister Harriet was driving. Harriet had their grandmother's long red hair, a gift neither of the other 2 O'Connor girls had received, and their father's eyes. Not their color, but the way they seemed to burn a hole into whatever she pointed them at when she was on a mission. There was a reason she was the one at the wheel right now. Harriet would never get called to battle and wonder if maybe she could spend the night snuggling her cat instead. Jenny, the youngest of the 3, was riding shotgun. Her pink mohawk had made her natural hair color irrelevant a long time ago. She turned the head of her axe over and over again and smiled. Growing up, Jenny wasn't exactly the kind of kid that liked pulling the wings off flies, but she got in trouble in school a lot for fighting and had an entire row of her bedroom devoted to horror DVDs. The gorier, the better. For Jenny, any night that she got to kill something was a good night. Harriet pulled over and they all got out. Okay, everyone, Harriet said. We're hiking in from here. We're going in quiet. That means you, Jenny. Jenny rolled her eyes but didn't argue. The vampire nest is in the farmhouse due east of here. There are 2 entrances and a window on the 2nd floor. I'll take the front door. Jenny, go through in the window. Mary, you're in the back. Any questions? Harriet always said that. More than once, Mary had used it as an opportunity to make a joke, but tonight she played it straight. I'm all set. Mary stopped once on their way to the nest, to rest and lean on a tree. She had a nasty stomach cramp and she wasn't sure why, but it mostly went away after a little light stretching. It was something to worry about later. Mary ran to catch up to her sisters, who were already most of the way to the nest. Part 2. Parasites are nature's master criminals, Dr. Lawton said. He nodded his head up and down quickly at the end of each sentence, causing the tip of his beard to bob in the air just above his collar. He walked back and forth in front of the classroom whiteboard while he spoke, and did a quick 180-degree turn whenever he ran out of space. Far from being simple bottom feeders, parasites often have startlingly sophisticated techniques for feeding and reproducing. We've all heard of the tapeworms such as the Diphyllothrium, which can grow up to 9 feet long within human beings or small intestine, the human large or small intestine. Quite the healthy fellow, but in terms of strategy, we might benefit more from considering Sacculina carcini. Sacculina carcini begins its life cycle as a tiny slug that forces its way into the inside of the outer carapace of a male crab. From within the crab's body, it executes a precision two-part assault on the crab's nervous system and genitals, adjusting the crab's hormonal balance to make it resemble a female and forcing it to perform a mating dance meant to attract others of its kind, so that they can perform coitus atop the dead remains of the crab's reproductive organs. Human beings are blessedly free from Sacculina and company, but even our own species must contend with such devious creatures as Candida, the famed urethra-invading fish. Its infection process begins when the fish The doctor was interrupted by a tall, handsome man sitting in the dark front row of the otherwise empty classroom. He was wearing a black turtleneck that wrapped tightly around his lean, muscled body and had pale blue eyes that gleamed gently in the candlelight and only slightly offset his thin, cruel mouth. "This is unnecessary, Doctor. We are meeting this evening for a specific purpose, not a refresher course." "Of course, Master, of course, I apologize. It's difficult for me once I get started. I have a passion for the topic." "Understandable," said the man in black. "That is the reason I enlisted your services. But we must focus now. Tell me about the samples that you were provided with. Tell me about vampires." "Certainly, Master Veros. From the biologist's point of view, the organism that causes vampirism isn't especially noteworthy. It's not a mosquito, but it's no candida either. It'd make for an uninteresting paper if it didn't happen to target human beings. The organism injects its spawn into new hosts during feeding, inflicts some strategic brain damage that changes the personality and dietary habits of its victims, causes the teeth to overgrow, and supercharges the body with adrenaline when threatened. That's really about it." The man in black hissed and leaned forward so that his elbows rested on his knees. "My senses penetrate mysteries unknown to mortal men. My intellect is without peer. My spirit challenges the heavens. This cannot all be explained away by the presence of an insect." "You're not going to like this, boss, but remember the part about the brain damage? Psychology isn't really my area, but people can believe in some weird shit when the right chemicals are involved. If it makes you feel any better, I'm not exactly happy about the situation myself. Ever since you put the whammy on me, I'm part of the club too." Veros briefly considered decapitating the biologist. He restrained himself. "What of the lichens?" "Oh yeah, the werewolves. Interesting, but fundamentally the same. The main thing is that it is a little like the Fangs trick, but in overdrive. When that thing gets moving, you got teeth, fingernails, body hair, the whole bit. It's really cool. It's just not magic, if that's what you're asking." "You were provided with many different samples." "For sure. A lot of fascinating stuff, too, but if you want the too long didn't read, vampires, lichens, werebats, succubi, stalkers, immortals, the whole 9 yards. Essentially just a bunch of bugs crawling up people's asses." Part 3. The mission went off without a hitch. Jenny got 3 kills and Mary and Harriet got 2 each, but Mary didn't care about that. It was done. The vamps weren't going to be a problem anymore, and no one got hurt except the bad guys. Mary could leave guts and glory to her psycho little sister. Mary's plan had been to skip the after-mission celebration, but she changed her mind when she heard they were heading to the Muddy Field. The field is the gathering place for all of Cedar Falls' supernatural community. All were welcome. The only rules were no violence, no talking about magic to mundanes, and no forgetting to tip. The sisters took a booth in back. There's a big wooden shamrock made from scavenged lumber hanging on the wall over their table. Mary was scanning the room. She heard a familiar accent. I cannot do accents, so that's just here. In advance, that's how it is. "Good evening, ladies. A heavenly pleasure, as always, to see the lot of you." Mary could already feel herself starting to turn bluish as she turned to face their waiter. Mary knew Liam. She knew his ginger with a six-pack and a low, sexy voice self very well. She looked up, and there were those big green eyes looking right back at her. She managed to keep it together for long enough to order a drink without completely turning into a raspberry. Liam winked at her one last time before he left with their orders. Jenny at least had the decency to wait until he was gone before she went to work. "Mary likes a leprechaun. Mary likes it." Mary got redder. "Shut up." "You do know he's a leprechaun. Because if you're only just finding out that the cute Irish waiter at the Muddy Field is on the hunt for his lucky charms, then let me tell you one thing." She stopped. There was a chill in the air, and suddenly, standing where Liam had been, was a tall, viciously handsome man with long black hair. Extreme, more than words hair. It'd be fun to... Hey, somebody got it. All right. It'd be fun to look at if it weren't for the menacing aura radiating from him. Truth be told, it was still kind of fun to look at. To say nothing of those cheekbones. I bring word from the vampire conclave. The good times came to a crashing halt. The entire table suddenly went from relaxed and imminently drunk to tense and fight ready. They were a wolf pack, focused and ready to act. If it wasn't for this fucking stomach cramp that still hadn't gone away, Mary supposed that she would feel pretty badass. Part 4. Bugs up their asses. Dr. Lawton clapped his hands at the end of each word, hopping up and down the whole time. I can't emphasize that enough. That's what's going on here. You can go ahead and consider the exclamation point to be put firmly in place. That really is the heart of this entire situation. Veros the Dreaded rubbed his eyes and sighed. He once again considered killing his new fledgling and forgetting about this whole plan. The results hadn't exactly been inspiring so far. Still, though, he was curious, and that was reason enough to restrain himself for now. What of the hunters, the ones they call the Chosen? At the mention of the Chosen, Dr. Lawton got even more excited. He pogoed up in the air and clutched his hands together against his chest. Oh yeah, those things. Really interesting. Not the kind of mating behavior you see in mammals all that often. Vera sat up a little straighter. Mating behavior. Oh yeah, it's definitely mating behavior. Come on, you must have noticed these Chosen shacking up with other supernaturals over the years. It is forbidden. It is one of the few areas where the Vampire Conclave and the Council of Hunters are in agreement. And yet, I'll bet it happens all the goddamn time. Veros again considered murder. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. You are correct. It is a rare decade where we do not uncover a romantic relationship between one of our kind and the ones who are supposed to be hunting us. Sure, that aligns with the data. The whole hunting thing is basically a mating dance. You exclude the weak, bang whoever's left, add their genetic diversity to yours, and spit out kids with more and better superpowers over the course of the next generation or so. Veros had never been entirely comfortable with modern science, and he specifically disliked the idea of talking about intelligent beings as if they were cattle. Dr. Lawton was nearing the end of his indulgence. He did not seem to be aware of it. Your theory seems flawed, Veros said. The Chosen rarely live long enough to have children. In fact, I can't recall it ever happening, and I've been paying close attention for a very long time. Oh, for sure. I'm talking about the parasite's offspring. They nest in the dead bodies of their hosts, dig their way out of the soil a few months after they get buried, scurry around looking for a young woman on the cusp of adolescence, and if they find one, then bang, pow, magic. The poor kid starts dreaming about killing vampires, and we're off to the races for the next round. Veros stood up and moved slowly towards the whiteboard. The Chosen believe they have been selected by cosmic forces to protect humanity from evil. They believe that our two factions are locked in an eternally recurring struggle between light and darkness. Yeah, well, people used to think rubbing other people's pus in their wounds was good for them. They were mistaken. I don't know what to tell you. Part 5. Less than an hour later, Mary and her two sisters were back in the woods, running around with their weapons drawn. The vamp with the long black hair was in the lead. That felt strange to all of them, but an alliance like this wasn't entirely without precedent. The Vampire Council were evil scumbags by definition, but they didn't lie. At least not when they made a blood oath. They'd do every sneaky thing they could think of to lure you into a pitched battle so they could try to kill you face to face, but if you were approached by a council representative in a neutral meeting ground, that meant they'd be straight with you. That meant that, if they sent a cute boy with long black hair to tell you that there was a world-level threat going down right now, tonight, you believed them. The council didn't want the world destroyed, they wanted to take it over. It was a slight but acute philosophical difference, and under other circumstances, maybe Mary would spend some time thinking it over. But right now, she was keeping herself distracted by keeping a close watch on Vampire Messenger Boy's ass. Vampire Messenger Boy's name was Nero, and he had a notably great ass. It was more of a lean Olympic swimmer's ass than Liam the Leprechaun's, who had more of a chunky weightlifter situation going on that she also enjoyed on its own merits. Now, while she might not be a fan of the entity that the ass in question was attached to, it was something nice to focus on in the moment. Mary'd wonder if even that wasn't giving Nero enough credit. Even aside from the ass and the hair, he had a certain quality. A special something. He was dedicated. He was focused. It was admirable, even if he did happen to work for the other side. Admirable, and if she was being honest with herself, attractive. It was something she'd have to worry about later. Peeking through the trees, she saw the outline of buildings, moonlight shining in windows. They were here. It was go time. Part 6. Veros rose from his seat, closed his eyes, and lifted his head up towards the ceiling. They've arrived. Their scent is on the wind. He reopened his eyes and looked back down towards Dr. Lawton. I'm sure, Veros said, that you would be happy to inform me that I am deluding myself, and that my sense of smell is merely the result of insects laying eggs in my brain. Not at all. Smell is a powerful thing. A wolf can detect the smell of blood at a distance of silence, fledgling. Dr. Lawton's mouth snapped shut. Your belief system would replace a world of mystery and wonder with a petri dish full of slime. I am an apex predator. I am one with the night. I am not a puppet for a cockroach. I turned you because I thought your perspective might prove fruitful, but you no longer have anything to say that I am interested in hearing. Varos reached out behind Dr. Lawton's head and tilted it to the side, revealing the biologist's neck. 7. According to Nero, a rogue vampire elder named Varos established himself here a few weeks ago. The area had been some kind of resort for people who didn't fit in the nearby campgrounds, a bunch of little cabins around a lake with a hotel in front near the highway, but the entire complex had been closed for a year or so. They weren't sure what Varos had been up to since he'd arrived, but he'd been kicked out of the council for investigating forbidden lore, and according to their source, something big was going down tonight. There had been no time to marshal their allies, so they turned to their enemies instead. The 4 of them had expected a few fledglings to be spread out along the perimeter. Not as any real obstacle, but as a warning. The big boys would hear the baby vampires getting killed and know something was up. No fledglings tonight, though. They left the cover of the tree line and advanced into the clearing between the hotel and the lake, and they were undisturbed the entire time. Jenny was pissed off. Where the hell are they? Mary saw a light in a second-floor window. 8 o'clock, second floor. The 4 of them turned towards the hotel as the sound of breaking glass cut through the night, only to be immediately followed by a different sound, a roar that started as a human being screaming but quickly changed into something quite different. Mary looked up at the light in the window. The curtains were drawn, and all she could see was a silhouette. At first, the silhouette had the shape of a man. Then it no longer did. And part 8. Dr. Lawton stumbled backwards with tears in his eyes. Master, sir, Varos, I'm sorry. It was what you said you wanted. Varos was curled up on the floor, clutching at his face, rubbing his palms into his cheeks as if he was trying to scrape something off them. Sticking out from his lips through his turtleneck was a long syringe with the plunger only half depressed. Inside it was a green fluid that glowed faintly in the dark. Varos's body shook. He moaned, stopped moaning, and was still. Then he moved again. More precisely, his body moved. His chest popped upwards, jerking the rest of his body an inch across the floor in a random direction. Like a Mexican jumping bean, Dr. Lawton thought. It was an amusing idea until he realized that yes, it was exactly like that. He turned and ran, and Varos's skin split open at his shoulder blades. Blood spilled on the floor as something forced its way through Varos's right eye socket. Something that wiggled. 9. By the time Mary could convince herself that she wasn't dreaming, the bug had burst through the window and was crawling down the side of the building. By the time it had skittered across the open field and closed the distance between itself and Mary's group, she knew it was real, but she still hadn't had time to count all of its limbs. It towered over them, which you'd think would make it easy to hit, but the segment of its body that she could reach was almost entirely composed of giant, constantly shuffling insect legs, and Mary's first few swings all whiffed. Nero did the thing the vampires always did and charged right in, fangs first. The bug cut him in half at the waist, and he collapsed in a pile of entrails and loose body parts. Blood had splashed everywhere. It smelled like someone had thrown a water balloon full of shit and copper. No tears for the pretty dead boy, but her sisters weren't doing much better. Mary heard her little sister cry out. She took a moment to look to her left, a moment that she knew might be suicidal all by itself, and saw Jenny drop her axe and fall to the ground, clutching her stomach. Injured, or dead, or soon to be dead, Mary had no idea. She heard Harriet scream somewhere behind her. Harriet, who was always strong, who was never frightened. The fight thickened. Just a moment ago, Mary had been fighting back 2 or 3 of the creature's limbs. Now she was fighting all of them, alone. She tried to withdraw. Turning her back and running would be suicide, but she could take a step backwards and give the creature a chance to do the same. There was a whole town full of yummy morsels not far from here, and most of them, if all this thing wanted was a meal and it had a brain, it might take advantage of the opportunity to retreat. It backed away as Mary did. She held her sword in front of her. The insect wasn't running. It wasn't attacking her either. It was thinking. Either that or Mary was deluding herself, but it seemed to be making a decision. When it moved towards her again, it moved deliberately. Maybe it thought that she would turn and run, and that it would be able to take her out when her back was turned. Mary was almost flattered. It wasn't like she had a chance in a straight fight. Of course, her stomach would take right now to feel like someone was twisting a knife through her belly button. It was too much to expect that she'd have a perfect death. This would have to be good enough. She moved into a ready stance and waited for the creature to charge. The truck came out of nowhere. Whoever was driving didn't turn the headlights on until the last minute. It hit the center mass of the monster, sending it flying backwards towards the lake in a tangle of spasming limbs. The driver stomped on the brakes, digging deep tire marks into the dirt. He unrolled a window. Mary couldn't get a good look at him in the glare of the headlights. "Get in." Mary couldn't argue. She vaulted into the bed of the truck just before it started moving again. 10. Dr. Lawton didn't know how long he'd have before the thing that had been Varos recovered and came after them. He knew it wasn't dead, and he knew he couldn't outrun it, even in the truck, and even if he'd left the last of the chosen behind. He'd seen it kill the other 3 members of the group. The 4th wouldn't be more than a speed bump, and then the creature would follow his scent and come barreling down the highway after him. He couldn't run, so now was the time to hide. Maybe the last of the chosen would have some idea how they could turn the tables. He knew that he wasn't coming up with much himself. He drove the car around the hotel, made it to the parking lot, parked by the entrance, and ran from the car into the building. He didn't bother telling the girl to follow him. He figured that she'd get the idea. He barely got him through the doors before he was knocked to the ground from behind and a sharp metal edge pressed against his throat. "You're a vampire," the chosen said. "Not exactly the biggest problem you have tonight. Could you take your knee off my back?" She didn't move her knee. "What's the story with the monster?" "It was my master Varos. Look, it's complicated. Basically, that thing is going to kill both of us, head to the nearest populated area, and kill as many more people as it can so we can lay eggs on all the corpses." "I'm going to assume you're not lying to me, at least for right now. If I change my mind about that, you're finished. How did Varos transform into whatever that thing is?" "He wanted to become more powerful. I was a biologist. He came to me. He's going to kill us, and then he's going to start killing everybody else. Keep your shit together and keep your answers short. How did he do it?" "A syringe in my coat pocket." It was the last thing Dr. Lawton ever said. 11. Cut off the head, stab through the stomach, penetrate the heart. Mary had practiced the 1-2-3 so many times that she sometimes did it in her sleep. It crossed her mind that this might be the last time, but she didn't dwell. Her sisters were dead, and that thing that killed them was going to kill more people if she allowed it to leave this place. She could hear something crunching and pounding through the brick on the far side of the building. It was digging through the walls, looking for her. No time for fear, no time for sanity, no time for second guessing. It was her job to protect the world from monsters or die trying. All of her decisions had been made a long time ago. The syringe was where the dead doctor had said it was, kept safe in a little wooden case that looked like it had been meant for 2. The remaining syringe was full of green fluid that glowed gently in the dark. Mary breathed in, breathed out, pressed on the plunger to get rid of air bubbles like she'd seen on TV, found a vein, and inserted the needle. The monster was getting close. She could hear it. The green stuff was cold as it entered her vein and ran up the length of her arm. 12. It took the High Council a few hours to retrace the steps of the Chosen. It would have taken even longer than that if Liam the Leprechaun hadn't seen them leave the bar with Nero and thought to call it in. There wasn't much of a trail to follow once they headed into the woods. There weren't very many places to search either, and they'd been notified weeks before that something weird had been going on at the hotel. The council had been planning on investigating, but they had been busy with other things that had seemed more important. In the days and months and years to come, nobody had to say out loud that things might have gone differently if they'd checked up on the campground sooner. Everybody knew. The council investigators arrived at the campsite right as the sun came up. They had enough pull with the local cops to delay them, but not keep them away forever. They needed to do their job and disappear. There were 3 bodies in the open field between the lake and the hotel, a vampire and 2 of the Chosen. All 3 were bagged and loaded into the side of their truck. There's a hole in the side of the hotel. They followed it to the lobby, where they found and disposed of a second vampire, and up to the roof from there, where it was apparent that something large with green and black guts had been aggressively torn to pieces. The things inside had been smeared across the concrete in 3 broad strokes that formed either a sloppy Z or an X that had been underlined for emphasis. And the remaining pieces of the monster's shell had been piled on top of each other in the corner. There was no sign of the 3rd Chosen except for her katana. abandoned in the lobby. They made sure to grab it before they burned the hotel to the ground. 13. The Chosen received 4 funerals. 1 public funeral for each of the 3 girls, and a 4th for everyone they knew, or for everyone in the know. The girls' parents, the members of the council, and a couple of close friends who shouldn't have been in the loop according to the rules, but who weren't going to get kicked out of the room now. The council would have to keep an eye on them to make sure they didn't do anything stupid like go to the press. All that could be dealt with in the long term. That was what the council was here for. One of the things. As far as anyone knew who didn't need to know otherwise, the Chosen were cremated. The given reason for this was that the magical power locked inside their bodies needed to be ritually dispelled. The truth was that the ashes given to the parents of the Chosen were just ashes. The bodies were never burned. They were here, in the council's headquarters, deep within the earth. At least 2 of them that had been recovered. They still hadn't figured out what had happened to Mary. They devoted considerable resources to finding her, with no luck so far. Another problem. So many problems. The High Counselor was going to be very busy once he went back up to the surface, but he still looked forward to leaving this place. Of all his responsibilities, this was the one he hated the most. Jenny and Harriet had each been laid out on a stone slab. Each of the 2 stones, each of the 2 corpses, was entombed in a box of extra-strength plexiglass. In the old days, the counselors tried to grab the seedlings the instant that they emerged. These days, they just captured the creatures in a box and let the medical technicians know so they could do their job. There was no practical reason for the High Counselor to be here, but he refused to dispose of the ritual. He had sent these 2 girls to their deaths, and would send others after them to their deaths as well. Sitting here with their remains was a way of reminding himself that what it was he really spent his life doing. The hand of the High Counselor sat next to the Counselor. He'd be the Counselor himself someday. He needed to see this too. He needed to know what it felt like. The hand broke the silence. Why do we lie to them? Why all the nonsense about magic and reincarnation and magic swords? Why don't we just tell them the truth? Harriet's body twitched once and then a second time. The skin between her ribs split open in a thin vertical line, and the shape of her torso was distorted as what was inside came squirming out. The truth, the High Counselor said, is that the Chosen live their lives in the shadow of death. They fight against overwhelming odds and inevitably fall so that the rest of their species can spend their days and nights oblivious to the danger surrounding them. They are heroes. That is the only truth that matters. Would telling them about what happens here bring them closer to that truth or carry them further from it? The seedling threw the bulk of its body against the plexiglass cage. The sound it made was wet and loud, like fish hitting a boat. 14. Closing time. The parking lot was empty except for Liam the Leprechaun's van. He always parked in a corner of the lot that was directly under a street lamp. Liam liked this town, but with so many weird people around, it wasn't the kind of place where you wanted to be alone in the dark for any longer than you had to. He got in, started the engine, and heard something slapping against the side of the van. He looked in his right rearview mirror. What he saw clearly. There was no room for error, no shadows or smoke or other excuse for rationalization. What he saw was a pink slug, about 6 feet tall, frantically humping the side of his dark green 1998 Ford Econoline. His blood froze, even as he was deeply confused. His first reflex was to start the engine and pull out as fast as he could, but he was afraid that he'd run over part of the slug. It wasn't that he thought he'd hurt it. The thing had the consistency of wet concrete, and it was strong enough to tilt the van gently onto its 2 left wheels with each thrust. He just didn't want to make it angry. It didn't seem to be angry now, or at least Liam didn't think so. Something about how it was hitting the car, something about the rhythm. It was weird and scary and not something he wanted to think about right now. He threw the car door open and ran across the parking lot instead. The slug glided along the pavement like a hockey puck, shooting past him and completing a U-turn before Liam could even change direction, so that the 2 of them were facing each other. For a moment, Liam was still, and so was the slug. It slid toward him slowly until there was less than a foot of empty space in between the 2 of them, and stopped again. An orifice split open in the side of the slug's body. A thin line, a sharp knife cutting through gelatin. A rope-like proboscis slid out from the opening, a tentacle the color of a purple bruise. At the very tip of the appendage was an orifice. It was wet
and shined even in the deep light of the parking lot. The slug reached out with the tip of its appendage, touched the side of Liam's face, and slowly traced his jawline from cheek to chin. Then it reached behind him and pinched his ass. Liam jumped backwards. The giant slug made a noise that was not unlike a giggle. And that is it. Thank you so much. All right. So we'll be here this time next month. And she's over there. I'm pointing at her right now. She's going to be featured. I'm doing the YouTube and doing the whole thing next month. And thank you, everybody. Thank you to all you fun folks. And we'll see you next time.